The year I turned 14 was the last year I would be permitted to attend my favorite summer sleepaway camp, St. George's. The camp is located in Orkney Springs, Virginia, a sleepy little unincorporated community entirely centralized around the existence of the Orkney Springs Hotel. Built in the early 19th century, then restored in the 70s after ownership changed, there is to this day a stagnant quality of time in Orkney Springs which contributed greatly to the mood of the camp. Everything was a frozen effect. Antique relics from the hotel's early history on display behind velvet ropes. Old southern recipes from the same line of moo-maw woman pumping hearty fare out of the communal kitchen. And the same rusty, dangerous elevator which campers were chastised to never play on leading up to the kitchen. The camp is also owned by the Episcopal Diocese, and so subsequently we shared the timeless sights, sounds, and smells of that place, forever caught in a long-ago decade. Being 15 is a fussy age, a little too old to enjoy macaroni art or tie-dye t-shirts or sing-alongs without that first hint of the self-conscious discomfort that comes with puberty. At 14, I was still content with these things, though they admittedly were already beginning to lose a little of their succor. As a camp senior, the option was given to me to pick one of the 3-day wilderness excursions: canoeing, hiking, or rock climbing. I chose canoeing, and then with 10 other campers and 3 counselors, we departed in a van with our boats for what I assume now was the south branch of the Potomac River. We would be crossing over into West Virginia at some point, though that was often the case. The joke goes at St. George's that you can pick blueberries until Virginia and take a P.U.M.S. Virginia all in the same 5 minutes. The first day out, we passed boats with rural hunters as our canoes dragged lazily through a reedy dip in the river. They were the kind of West Virginian hunters you see in horror films, with 3 teeth, overalls over bare skin, and big old bloodhounds piled in or wet next to them in their busted canoes. They cracked piss beer out of styrofoam coolers and spoke in a dialect so thickly garbled that I doubt even the counselors knew what they were saying. I remember one counselor holding a map belt to the boat ahead of us, attempting to ask questions. The second day back out on the water under the burning hot sun, the counselors told us we were lost. Naturally, we were upset, but they reassured us that as long as we were following the river, eventually we would come out on the other end, nearing something familiar. Looking back now as an adult, I realized how young these counselors must have actually been, but I still wonder if their training was even adequate. The youngest might have been 17, the oldest in his early 20s, but I was 14 then, so I didn't want to think about any of those things. With little choice other than just to agree and keep rowing, we kept going forward. That afternoon, we pulled up on an unknown pebbly bank in order to make camp. A recent flood had torn debris from the river and washed it up on shores, as far up and down as the eye could see. All along the edge of the clearing, we found were natural teepee formations made of mangled tree trunks and wild, snarling branches. We dragged our canoes up the rocks to tuck them in beside the trees, and remember waves of tiny frogs fleeing in front of us in a green tide, and one fat toad that flopped on my boot toe wouldn't leave. Later, while hunting a suitable girls' latrine spot, I went inside one of the natural teepees and discovered the bloody skeletons of poached raccoons hanging wetly above. The blood hadn't completely dried yet. Their tails were still intact, fluffy in the breeze. A snuffed-out fire pit was directly below, and I thought the men with 3 teeth in their dogs were probably the ones likely to have done this. That night, we ate and sang camp songs and had s'mores and looked at the stars. After dark, for a briefly frightening time, a certain moaning noise began to intermittently come out of the woods. Our counselors quickly rushed to reassure us that the sounds were from cows, and that we must have camped at the very edge of a farmer's grazing property. We quickly accepted this and went to bed. The girls went to their tarp in one corner. Yards away, the counselor slept in their tent, and the boys' tarp sat on the farthest side of our grounds. I woke up deep in the middle of the night, with a mighty need to pee. I climbed out of the pile of snoring teenage girls, grabbed a flashlight and a bathroom kit, and ambled out into the trees to find a perfect spot. I don't remember being afraid in that particular moment, mostly interested in satisfying my bladder by emptying it. It was calm enough that when I encountered a strange figure a few minutes into my walk, I stopped, assuming it was one of my fellow campers. About 10 feet away from me, sitting on a broad, flat rock, was a young boy. He looked about my age, 14, maybe a week 16. His head was buzzed and his hair looked pale, maybe blonde. It was cold outside in a way that only mountains can be at night, and yet he wasn't wearing a shirt. He was a little cave-chested, and he sat with one elbow propped up on his knee, barefoot in tattered, ash-awash jeans. He was smiling just a little and looking directly at me. My first inclination was anger. I thought at first that this was Alex, one of the boys camping with us who worked picking corn with his father. I was about to tell him off for being a creep and watching girls pee in the dark, when I realized that there were a few fundamental things about what I was looking at that were wrong. This was not Alex. This was not Alex. This definitely was not Alex. The boy's eyes flickered in the beam from my flashlight, like a deer or a cat does when they cross headlight beams on the road. There was a gold fluorescence to it that human eyes couldn't produce. I remember standing there for some time, just staring at him, as my mind was trying to put this puzzle together. The length of time I stood there staring is the single detail I can attribute to knowing that this really happened to me, that it was real, when years later all I can think about is that science must have an answer to this somewhere. The universe is so huge that we know so little about it, but that I know that I saw this. Because I looked at him, and he looked back at me, so directly, so incredibly aware of me and I, of him, until I realized I could see the trees behind him through his body. I could see through him, and she was smiling at me, and we were lost. There's a quality of fear when it becomes that incredibly intense which makes you entirely lose your grasp of time. All I know is that I dropped everything in my hands, my toilet paper, my flashlight, and I ran through the dark. Before I knew it, I was lost in the woods. I have no concept of how long I ran alone through the dark. I have never been this scared in my life, and I pray that I never will be again. Everything gets distorted. Time, breath, space, thought. I don't remember screaming either, but apparently I was. I screamed loud enough that a friend woke up and came to find me, popping up unexpectedly from behind a bush and scaring the shit out of me all over again. The one miracle I can attest to is I never actually pissed my pants, though I think it would have been justified. Back at the camp, I tried to wake up the girls. I cried and begged for them to listen to me, that I thought I seen a ghost and we need to get out of here. But no one really cared. I tried to lay back down and go back to sleep, but I kept hearing footsteps circling around us just behind the tree line. A constant crunch, crunch, crunch of two bare feet in the underbrush. The next morning when I retold my story to anyone who would listen, a few shy girls told me that they had heard the footsteps in the woods. When the sun was at its morning's brightest, after wrestling with myself about it, I finally returned to the rock that I found the boy sitting on. I stood on it and looked around at the ground. The dirt was scattered with rusting shotgun shells. That day, we got back in our boat and followed the river back to the familiar territory. I don't have any recollection of where this site was, or if I could indeed ever find it again, though I know I would never want to. This is something I recently had happened to me a few weeks ago. I have more encounters while hunting, but I will share those another time if this goes all right. they're a bit longer and more strange. I am from southwest Georgia and live right on the Georgia-Alabama line. I was riding dirt roads one night with my friend and her younger sister. We were fishing earlier that evening and didn't have any luck, so we decided to get some beer and go for a ride. On into the night, after riding dirt roads in between Lumpkin and Georgetown, we went to a spot I know pretty well. That was a swamp off the side of the dirt road. So we get out and decide to chill for a little while. About 30 minutes pass and I decide to walk down a little ways into the water and cast out my pole with some stank bait on it. My friend is behind me, standing beside the truck with her sister in the back seat. And for a few minutes, no one is talking and no music is playing. Then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my friend screams. And not just a scream, but a horror movie type bloody murder scream. Like it scares the living shit out of me, and I think someone just died type of scream. I go from complete and relaxing silence in the middle of a swamp in Georgia to a scream. It'll scare you, and I don't care who you are. So I turn around and I yell, "What's wrong?" And as soon as I said that, something ran past me into the water. Keep in mind it is completely dark and my spotlight is in the truck. This thing, I don't know what it was, ran by me on 2 legs. It did not make one sound until it hit the water. It goes off into the water and it sounded heavy, and then all of a sudden, nothing. As if it either flew away, as silly as it may sound, or it went underwater. Because the noise stopped out in the middle of the swamp. It was moving so fast, if it would have hit the woods, I feel like I would have heard something compared to it running on the clay. Now, all of this happened within a time frame of like 3 to 7 seconds. But, in my mind, this was all slow motion. I walked up to my friend and her little sister jumps out of my truck and is standing beside me. I asked what the hell happened, and they have no idea. But my friend said she looked over from her phone and saw something standing beside her, and she never heard a single thing walk up to her. Her little sister was on the other side of the back seat, and when she looked out the window, she said she saw a gray ear, but didn't say anything because she thought I was playing a joke or something on them. Putting the two together, the creature stood beside my friend and never made a sound for about 5 minutes until she screamed. All 3 of us confirmed it was on 2 legs. I've hunted here my whole life. It wasn't a deer for obvious reasons. It wasn't a coyote because it was too short. It wasn't a hog. It wasn't a deer. So, what could it have been? It obviously wasn't a small animal like a raccoon or opossum. We don't have bears in South Georgia either. So I can honestly say, and even after asking people's opinions, from my 25 years of being on this earth, I have no idea what walked up on us that night in the woods. Last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into the Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks and forests because it's isolated, so my dog can roam and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy rough drives into parks sometimes and a lack of service and assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road kind of curling up a mountain at around maybe 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area. That feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I texted my boyfriend that it just didn't feel right in this area. But my phone completely lost service very quickly. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel on some broken glass mixed in with dirt on the gravel road. Yucca, my dog, starts to growl slightly. She's vocal, but I've almost never seen her growl at anything other than dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite an edge, but I pride myself on being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a little bit further with my grumbling pop to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continued to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind, no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this road anyway, and that's if anyone's even there. I hear men's voices. They sound close and I think I should call out to them. So I stop my car and then kind of freeze, feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look for what the voices could be coming from. I have never run into people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and scared and focused on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at hearing grumbling when we started outside of my car. Kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain and not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine, and the huge open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself. The voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened, cool. But I remember this place. It sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to that feeling I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me, as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year. I've mentioned this place to a few people, and the haunting vibes that it gave, and nothing much more. I googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, hence my fascination with this little event. So my boyfriend and I were coming out fishing from our trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2-3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files, and ended up on some True Stories video dealing with the Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog and playing some Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. Very briefly, he says that they are casually known to mimic voices. I mean, when I say that I got horrible chills. I got horrible chills. I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me when I was probably close to a Wendigo. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you, or some other dad joke. And he was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said specifically because you said you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel strange as how when I start Googling Wendigos, etc. They're allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they will live in that sort of area. It all matched out. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, and I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I've done a lot of solo traveling both in and out of the country, and I've never had such a bad feeling before. On top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seems strange, I don't think I'll be doing any more solo travels around there, unless it's around civilization, of course. Does anyone know of any authentic Native American lore, or has anyone else had any kind of inexplicable experience like this? My life in the rural Midwest has always been pretty mundane. I've always enjoyed being in and around the woods, hills, and rivers. Most of the friends I have today, many years later, are thanks to that. We all have lots of stories, but one sticks out above all others. A friend and I had set up camp in the woods along the Illinois River, many miles from the nearest town, which had maybe 1,000 people in it. We sat by the fire, tucking on a bottle of lemonade, vodka, and laughing. and attempting to catch and release small catfish while preparing to sleep because we had planned to leave early the following morning. Eventually, we hear the inevitable sounds of branches and slow crunching footsteps. We joke about it and remember a story passed around by the locals about a high school teacher who was approached by a panther while in the woods taking samples for her upcoming class. However, this particular part of Illinois is too north to see mountain lions or similar large cats, so we didn't worry much about it. The time comes for us to call it a night. We bucket some water on the fire and head into the shelter. Only a few moments pass before we hear it. A rumbling noise, similar to a growling. It isn't necessarily feline, but it's obviously very close and somewhat terrifying. Eventually, we devised a plan. Stayed together, exit the shelter with our sleeping bags spread out around our upper bodies to appear larger than we actually were, weapons in hand. We shine all of our lights around and shout and kick and throw things. Almost immediately, we watched a very large cat leap from a low branch and lower itself into the weeds. We continued to shine our lights in that direction, but didn't see any sign of it. All those sounds of something moving slowly could still be heard nearby. We decided to relight the fire and stay awake until sunup, watching and listening for any signs of it. The sounds subsided after a while, and eventually the sun began to rise. We took down our makeshift shelter, gathered our backpacks, and walked towards the nearest tree line exit before continuing our journey. We both looked back at that day, wondering if we would have died if we were not well prepared.